4 to 3 lane conversion study. Um, Before I turned it over, I debated about whether I'd share this story or not, and I decided I'm going to before I turn it over to Ted. So the day that I won my first election back in 2000, I was looking out my kitchen window, and most of you probably know I live on the corner of Montana and Arcade Street, which is Highway 61 coming into St. Paul between Wheelock and Larpenter. And I was watching, and at that time, that road was 2 lanes each way with really wide shoulders. And there was always accidents because all the residential folks making left turns going north on 61, coming into the community, but they also tons of speeding coming up from the stop sign at Wheelock. It was just a disastrous situation, accidents constantly. And I'm watching, and there's a lady at the intersection with her left turn, or not with her left turn in, which means she's in the left lane, through traffic lane. And then there was a car that came and stopped behind her, and then a garbage truck's coming barreling down the street. And that garbage truck did not slow down one bit. I watched. And she had already had her wheels turned to make the turn. So when the garbage truck hit the car behind her and that car hit her car went into the oncoming traffic. And there was another car coming at her, and there was a head on. And I watched it all happen, and the lady died. And that was the day I won my election. And I'm thinking, I got to be able to do something about that. I can't let that happen anymore. And so my first meeting, after meeting with the county manager to find out where my office was,
Jim, you are frozen to me.
Me too.
Okay.
uh-oh.
There you go. You're back.
All right. So I don't know where I froze up. I hope we don't have more connections. But anyways.
You said you couldn't let that happen ever again. You found your office, and then what?
We met with the public works director. We met with MnDOT. And within 2 months, we actually did a 4 to 5 conversion. We took 2 travel lanes each way because there was enough room. We pushed those travel lanes out and we put a turn lane in the middle. So now and we've never had another accident on that stretch of road again for left turn lanes into the community because they have their own turn lane now. But that was really my first experience, both with being an elected official, where you could start having influence on benefits to your community and how to get that done. But really, the intersection of so many things coming together, because I learned a lot about the decision making about roadways and how to make change, and it wasn't easy and all those things. Now fast forward to a couple of years ago, and we had another fatality on Greenbrier and Maryland Street. Woman trying to cross 4 lanes, busy traffic. She's doing the right thing. A car stops in the right lane. She's out there. She goes past that car. She did not look, and the car coming through on the left lane just smashed right into her, and it was a fatality. So with community meetings, folks, right away said, let's go to a 4-3 conversion, 25,000 cars a day. Federal standards say, 17,000, maybe 8,000, 18,000. You get up to 20,000, you're really pushing it. Fortunately, Jim Tolis at the time was really open to us taking a look at that. We had a paving remilling project coming on. We actually delayed for a year to really take a look at it. And then we made the decision, and I give Public Works, all of the Public Works folks a lot, because this was a heart and mind decision. And for engineers, it's all about mind, right? Numbers, everything, data drives everything. And they said, you know what, we'll take a chance. We'll do a study on this stretch of Maryland Street, and we'll see what happens. And so we painted temporary lines, again, delayed the mill and overlay to see how it went. And as you'll find out here, I'm not going to put by any measure, that stretch of roadway is tremendously safer than it was when it was 4 lanes. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ted.
Thanks, Chair McDonough. That's a great story leading into what this study did. Like you said, unfortunately, sometimes it takes some unfortunate accidents or issues or things to occur for some action to take place. But I'm glad my predecessors had some foresight. They had great support from the county board to move forward on this initiative. It really started with that pilot project on Maryland Avenue. That set the framework for what we were doing, extending Maryland Avenue, and then also on McKnight and Larpenteur. And really the genesis for this study was we didn't want to continue to look at these road by road. We wanted to look at the whole system, see what the whole system was like, so that when we got to the place where these projects were going to be designed and put into the tip and actually do some sort of construction project on them, we had already done the planning work to say that, you know what, this is a viable one. We can do it, or this one has some issues. We need to have a little more time. It just helps set the framework across the whole system. It helps us communicate to our city partners and the community to say, you know what, this is a road that eventually we're going to change. You know, we may not be doing it tomorrow. We may not be doing it in 2 years, but this is a road that eventually is going to change because we can, because it meets our values and it's the right thing to do. And so Brad Estoshan is our county traffic engineer. He and his group, Luis Flores and Tae-Young Kim, supporting it with a consultant to help us put this study together. I will say that kind of tapping back into what engineers are like, this is a technical report. It has technical information from it. We went nerdy on it, but we felt that that was important. That sets the baseline for us to help us bring that technical information into our values, into our beliefs, into the things and measures that we want to change and improve. And so that helps set that framework for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad and he'll go through the presentation with us.
All right, thanks, Ted. So we're going to talk about several things today, and they can kind of be lumped into these 4 categories. So we're going to talk about, you know, what our goals and objectives were for this study, and then we're going to dig into a few of the details, and specifically, you know, how we assessed or examined the feasibility of how these roadways would operate. In addition, we're going to dig into a little bit of the details in terms of how we tried to quantify or at least compare the benefits of all of the roads that we studied. And then we'll wrap up the presentation talking about the results and how we intend to leverage this study going forward, because a study is only as good as the implementation efforts. And so, you know, that'll be key, is how do we take this and leverage this to make the needed changes on our roadway network. So we had several corridors that were included in the study. There were 19 roadways that were county roads. They ranged in length from about 0.3 of a mile to just over 4 miles. Overall, we had 27.5 miles of road that were part of the study. So that's about 10% of our roadway network in the county was involved in this study. Our traffic volumes range from, you know, a low of 3,200 vehicles a day to some sections of our county road network that have over 26,000 vehicles a day. You know, we didn't do this study in isolation. We had a technical advisory committee that had involvements with the cities of Roseville, St. Paul, New Brighton, and Maplewood. You know, they had several corridors or multiple corridors within their city that were included in the study. So we wanted to have them actively engaged in how we conducted the study and developed the results. So it was a good partnership to bring the cities on board. And I think that'll bear a lot of fruit when we get to the implementation phase. So, you know, our overall objective was to look at these 4-lane undivided roads to see if there's an alternative configuration that would be feasible. You know, and there was a bias. We were looking towards 3-lane conversions. You know, there were a few roads where we looked at something a little different than a 3-lane configuration as potential feasible outcomes. But for a majority of the segments, we're looking at the ability to convert that 4-lane undivided road to a 3-lane roadway. We wanted to try to project or determine the expected operational outcomes and look at this through all the corridors. So, do we expect there to be delay? And if so, how much delay do we anticipate? And look at things from an operational side to say, if we convert this, do we need to make some spot improvements for intersections or where the impact, and intersect with other parts of our network. We're also trying to quantify or at least project some of the expected benefits. And we'll get into those details a little bit later on. And one of the key issues that I think will really help us as we move toward implementation is to highlight issues that we need to resolve in our project development process. There will be decisions that will need to be made in terms of what this roadway look like, what kind of needs we're trying to accommodate, and so it'll be good to have a play sheet go in and say, what, we're going to need to talk about these issues. We didn't try to make any projections on how the local communities might resolve these issues or like to participate in resolving these issues as we develop the project. We definitely consider that to be an action that is we do as part of our project development process. And then additionally, this is a proven effective safety countermeasure. And I have no doubt that this will contribute to the overall safety improvements for all of our roadway users. I expect it to decrease motor vehicle crashes. I expect it to create a better environment for our non-motorized users so that they can use our facility in a safer manner. And then I also expect it to help our intermodal users that might be using mass transit or other forms of transportation where they spend part of their time as a non-motorized user, but then also traverse our roadways through a motor vehicle as well. And of course, I want to make sure that we do a deliberate tie, and our methodology in this project really tried to leverage our all abilities transportation network policy. And so, we incorporated that as key things that we evaluated in both our operational and our benefits calculations. As we're all aware, 4-lane undivided roads are not a good environment for our non-motorized or our transit users. And really, if we can figure out a way to use that space more effectively, these users will definitely realize some improvements, whether that's through safer crossings or additional space where they don't have to compete with our motorized vehicles. And so, we definitely incorporated the spirit and the application of our all abilities transportation network policy into this study. So I want to talk a little bit about how we did our feasibility screen. There were a variety of factors that we looked at in terms of trying to assess the feasibility of a 3-lane section. The obvious one is there enough space out there on the road? The narrowest 3-lane roadway section that we could accommodate would be 32 feet is a bare minimum. That's 2 11-foot lanes with a 10-foot center turn lane and no, I'll say no shoulders. So, in absolute terms, we need 32 feet. The good thing is every roadway we studied had more than 32 feet available. And so it wasn't, could we shoehorn a 3-lane in here? We had some space to work with. When we look at a desirable situation, 48 foot provides a lot of opportunities. That gives us those 2 lanes of 11 foot in each direction, in addition to that 10-foot center turn lane, and then introduces 8 foot of clear space on a shoulder that can be used to accommodate a variety of curbside uses. And so, that's one of the feasibility screens we looked at is, how close can we get to that desirable situation with what's out there? And would we need additional space in order to get to a desirable situation, or what trade-offs might we need to make through that project development process if we had something less than desirable? Next, we looked at those curbside uses that might be impacted by changing the roadway configuration. So, what impacts do that curbside use have to on-street parking, to transit stops, to loading zones? If there are impacts that will be realized from those curbside uses, that's something that we need to engage the community on. And so, looking at the existing curbside uses and kind of projecting forward into, can we still provide those curbside uses? If there are multiple curbside uses, That may be something that needs to be developed or decided when we get to implementation. And then the last thing we looked at was the operational considerations or operational concerns, and traffic, in terms of overall, Jim mentioned, 17,000 and under, these things can function really well. As you get above that, that 17 to 19, you might be pushing the limits, and over 19,000 vehicles a day, be strategic, investigate where your pain points are and figure out if there's ways to resolve those. And that's vehicles per day, but there are also constraints that happen in terms of hourly and directional travel. So, you could have a very peaky road where a lot of people use it for commuting. And if we get, there are traffic levels that we use to assess things, on I'll say a full-time basis, 24 hours a day, also on an hourly and a directional basis. So those were factors to, and you could have a lot of traffic traveling northbound in the AM hour and southbound in the PM hour. So those are things that we looked at from an operational standpoint to see if a 3-lane cross section would be feasible.
Brad, I want to stop you for a moment. Can you go back to that slide?
Yep.
So on the curbside use, on the Maryland 4-3 conversion, and as I stated, I mean, everything we measure, it's just safer. Speed limits have come down, everything. The one kind of issue that still provides some risk is the transit stops, because the buses always stop before the side streets, and you've got a car that's trying to make a left turn or even go through across the street. That bus is blocking their view, and they need to decide, do I have the patience to wait for that bus to go and then I'm going to figure it out, or am I just going to take a risk and go out there? Well, we know there's enough people that take that risk, right? And then that's where they're not as bad accidents, but that's where we're still seeing a lot of the accidents. Met Transit was a part of our study, and I know Met Transit was open to actually moving those transit stops to the far side of the intersection so it would free up unobstructed left turn or cross. A couple of issues with that is now you got people loading not at a sidewalk, right? It's in the boulevard, and then in the winter you got the issue with the snow. But I know they were open to actually moving those. How much have we actually talked with them as we're moving forward on these decisions that could maybe be implemented from the get-go, where we're actually moving those transit stops to the far side of those intersecting streets?
Commissioner, that's a good question. And a lot of that is the collaboration that we do in the project development processes. One of the things that we did in this study was identified all the transit stops along these corridors. So, again, we'll walk in knowing where the transit stops are at. And obviously, we collaborate with the local communities, and we'll also collaborate with the transit providers in terms of, hey, how can we make improvements for all of our users? And definitely examining those transit stops and then putting them in the best situation will be part of that project development process. And, on some other projects that I've been involved with at the county, we've had those conversations, and a lot of the times Met Transit is really interested in working to move these things. Other times they'll say, you know what, this is a transfer point and we don't want to have people have to cross the roadway twice to get to their transferring bus, and they might be a little more reluctant to move that stopping location. But in general, I think there is a good collaborative environment where transit stops are also, or Met Transit is looking to leverage this to improve the operations for their users as well. So I think it's a good environment where we can come together and make the best decision for all users. All right, so I'm going to jump over to the benefits screening that we did right now. And there were 5 factors that we looked at assessing the benefits. And one of the things that I want to set the stage for is we compared the 19 corridors to each other. So this is a relative benefit screen and not more of an absolute benefit screen like we did, or not an absolute screen like we did for the operational side. So we compared and contrast our 19 corridors to each other to kind of say where, based on our study, where might the biggest benefits be seen. So the first factor we looked at was the speed reduction. And what we really did is looked at the operating speeds compared to the relative posted speed limit. And so you could say, where do we have speeding issues along our corridors? You know, our place where we had the most non-compliance with the posted speed limit was on County Road F and 10th Street up in New Brighton. You know, the operating speeds there were about 60% over what the posted speed limit is. And so we had 5 different tiers that we kind of looked at for speed reduction. And so if you were going to get the maximum benefits from the speed reductions, you need to be about 33% over the posted speed limit. So a 40-mile-an-hour road to have operating speeds, you know, or sorry, a 30-mile-an-hour road to have operating speeds above that 40-mile-an-hour mark. So that was kind of the line if you wanted to be realize the maximum speed reduction. So that's how we try to address or project some speed reduction benefits as we look at where we had the highest non-compliance with the speed limits. And we do know that 4 to 3 lanes do reduce operating speeds to a certain extent. And so that's how we addressed, or we tried to quantify that benefit. We also looked at the number of access points, you know, the number of driveways, intersections per mile. And when we looked at that, you know, obviously the more access you have, the better benefits should be realized by those left turning vehicles that are trying to use those access points to either get to another roadway or a driveway to a property. Our number one spot where we had the highest access density was a section of Maryland between White Bear Avenue and Phelan. That had 57 access points over 0.8 of a mile. You know, so when you do the math, that's an access point every 75 feet. And so, you know, when we look at that, you know, basically the roads that scored, I'll say the highest for access density, you know, had about 60 accesses per mile. And so that's where our largest access benefit would be realized. Also, we know that there's crash reductions to the tune of about 15 to 30% for all crashes when we convert from a 4-lane to a 3-lane. In order to be the top benefit here, you need to have more than 46 crashes per mile per year. And we looked at this over a 5-year period. So the route with the highest crash density was a stretch of Maryland from Bryce to Able Street. And then this is a measure I don't like talking about, but they had 126 crashes per year in that stretch. So greatly exceeding that 46 or more threshold to be in the top category. So, you know, crash experience isn't something I ever want to be number one in, but for purposes of quantifying our benefit, I think this points to areas where we can realize some crash reductions. So that 126 crashes is 1 crash every 3 days, and that's not anything to strive for to be number one in that category.
Brad, before you move on to the next slide, I got a question here from Commissioner Mattis Castile.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Brad, I just want to clarify on the crash, the definition of crash, is that vehicle on vehicle? Is it vehicle on pedestrian? Is it vehicle on cyclist, or is it single vehicle? Like, how are we defining crash?
Sure, thanks, Commissioner. The crashes were all crashes, so crashes involving a motor vehicle with another motor vehicle, a motor vehicle with a pedestrian, and a motor vehicle with a bicyclist. So they were all crashes. We didn't have a subset that we used as our qualifying metric. And then we also looked at the benefits to our non-motorized users, so our pedestrian use, our pedestrian crossings, and our bicycle use. As you know, pedestrians can greatly benefit from a 4 to 3-lane conversion due to the reduced number of lanes to get across the road, the opportunity to provide additional pedestrian crossing enhancements to facilitate those movements, you know, whether that's in the form of a median refuge island or some additional signage or dynamic signage to help out. we didn't go out and count pedestrians and bikes on all these corridors. We just didn't have the resources to go out and do that. Instead, there's a subscription service called Streetlight. It's a big data provider that can be used, and you know, people use it. It's based on smartphones and follows where they go and what they do. You know, they kind of declare themselves as a pedestrian, a bicyclist, a motor vehicle user. And so we use that big data set and use this to get a pedestrian and a bicycle use index score. And so again, we use that relative comparison. It bodes well when we're looking at comparing corridors to each other using the same methodology. And so by using that, you know, we were able to see what this streetlight score was for pedestrian use and bicycle use. And obviously the highest pedestrian use and bicycle use spot would have 100 on the scale, and then the lowest would be prorated based on what the highest use was. So the range would be from 0 to 100 in terms of pedestrian and bicycle use. And so roadways that had the highest number of pedestrian crossings basically were at an index score of 82 or higher. Our Hamlin Avenue from Grand to University, that's a segment of a St. Paul road that was in here, was kind of our 100s that had the highest pedestrian use that was quantified by Streetlight. When we looked at our county road section, the stretch of Maryland from Rice to Able was the next location. So those two by far had the highest pedestrian use when we used this screen. And the same thing with the bicycle use. And so our Marshall Avenue between the River Road to Cretin was by far the largest area where we derived bicycle use using the streetlight data. White Bear Avenue was second in bicycle use, but that fell into that second tier in terms of the projected number of users. And so that's how we developed and projected. So we looked at the benefits across these 5 categories, summed them up, divided by 5 to come up with an average benefit for each section. And so, you know, from that, we kind of paused with the group and said, you know, here's what we have. And then we had built in our scope of work to do some detailed investigation on some corridors that maybe were on the cusp of operational performance, or, you know, might needed a little technical analysis to say, you know, hey, how can we make this project turn out to be a Maryland? You know, if the numbers are telling us, hey, this is going to be over capacity, you know, are there things that we can do maybe hinge on being successful versus rolling the dice and seeing what happens? And so what we did is we worked with the group and we selected 5 segments on 4 different roadways to do that detailed investigation. And then these corridors were County Road C from Lexington to 35E, Dale Street from Como to 36, White Bear Avenue from County Road D to Frost and Maplewood, and then also White Bear Avenue from Beam to Jarvis. And so we selected those 5 segments of road, in Old Highway 8, from County Road D to 5th Avenue in New Brighton. So we selected these 5 segments and looked at some of the details that go into you know, things that might need to be trade-offs or opportunities, or we can manage some of the various performances that people might expect. And so, you know, we looked at getting turning movement counts. We did some traffic modeling. We said, oh, okay, we have an intersection here that is going to be a choke point because we're taking away a single lane, and now we're going to have substantial queues and delays at this intersection. You know, what are some concepts or design alternatives that we might be able to do? You know, what are some unique characteristics, you know, and in particular, you know, parking analysis, that curbside use of parking, you know, how much was it actually used, and trying to get a good foundation for potential trade-offs that might be able to be made in order to make these kind of roads operate successfully. So a good example is that County Road C from Lexington to 35E. You know, we did that detailed investigation there where we looked at, you know, a cross section where we get that desirable 48-foot width, and we can do a lot of things with that. You know, but then the cross section changes a little bit farther down the road where we don't have as much of that shoulder width in it. It might be down to a 4 to 6 foot shoulder. And what does that mean for the potential operations and design of that roadway? You know, and then as we move east across that cross section, you know, we come to an intersection at County Road C in Victoria, which is an all-way stop. And it has some pretty substantial queues during the AM and PM peak periods. And obviously you take away a lane at that approach and those queues get longer. And so, you know, what could we do? So we modeled that intersection and we said, you know what, a roundabout would work here, a traffic signal would work here. And we would get that operational delay down to something that the public, you know, would find reasonable. You know, and then as we proceed even farther east, then we get into the area around 35E. We have a lot of closely spaced interchanges or intersections near that interchange. You know, that again, we have some concepts and things that we think are feasible that again, we can hinge on the side of being successful versus rolling the dice and seeing what happens. And so, you know, that's just an example of, you know, what this detailed analysis kind of lended us in terms of I'll say digging into the details and trying to figure out what is possible. So with all this, then we went to the trying to develop, I'll say, an implementation plan. And so the project team, in conjunction with the technical advisory teams, so that's the city reps that I introduced earlier, developed an implementation plan that was based on a combination of factors from the benefits and the feasibility analysis. You know, so the projects were broken into I'll say the expected work type that would facilitate that transition. So roads that didn't need a lot of work, you know, in terms of paving, you know, that's more of our minor type of roadway work. Where we had other roads where the pavement condition just, you know, wasn't conducive to doing anything on a short-term basis. And so these are mill and overlay or reconstruction grouping. So we looked at the corridors and said, you know what, this road's in pretty good shape. No need to mill and overlay it to facilitate the change. Other ones who said, you know what, there's just a lot of stuff that needs to be done here to do that. So we broke them into a minor, a major, and a reconstruction grouping. And then we combined our feasibility and our benefits analysis into a metric. And we kind of came up with a ranking of, you know what, things that we have no concerns on the feasibility and had the best benefits would be our #1 ranked potential for implementation. And we kind of rank them, you know, through each of those minor, major, and reconstruction groupings. You know, we did bounce the idea off the technical advisory committee and they thought that was a good way to proceed. I know that we have a lot of efforts going on in terms of, you know, being deliberate in terms of how we implement projects, especially in the racial equity lens being applied to our program. And really, when we look to develop these projects and move them forward, that's where we incorporate, I'll say, those considerations. You know, from right now, we used a lens of, you know, is it feasible and where do we get the most benefits? So the easiest location with the most benefits was #1 on our list. And as you go down, your trade feasibility benefits, feasibility and operational benefits as you go down that list. And so what that resulted in is this list here. And what I can tell you is Lydia had, so Lydia, our County Road F and a stretch of McKnight Road all scored well in terms of feasibility. We had no operational concerns. We had space to make that transition. And so those, you know, help contribute to those being in, I'll say, the top half of our implementation ranking. Other corridors, you know, in terms of, you know, our Marylands and our White Bear Aves scored well in terms of benefits. But, you know, there may be trade-offs, there may be things, there may be outstanding issues that need to be made in terms of you know, the feasibility of doing that. And so what I don't want you to walk away from this is saying we're going to start out #1 on our list and proceed down. You know, when we get to programming and opportunities, you know, we'll obviously accelerate the potential deployment of a 3-lane conversion as opportunities come up. But we thought it was important to kind of provide, I'll say, an objective measure in terms of implementation if we needed to refer to that. So One thing I can share with you is we do have 2 projects that are currently identified in our TIP, and they're not number 1 and number 2 on the list. We have an Old Highway 8 project and the Dale project from Como to 36 are both currently in our current TIP. And both of those were really driven by pavement needs. Is, hey, we had a mill and overlay project that was going to be planned. They were on this list. And so converting that cross section in conjunction with a planned mill and overlay is the way that we'll check those 2 boxes off and hopefully get to a conversion sooner rather than later. So that kind of leads us into how we want to look at deploying and building on this project as a basis to make some safety improvements. And so we definitely do want to build off our successes at Maryland and McKnight and Larpenteur. Those are clearly projects that we worked really hard on implementing, and there was some resistance or skepticism up front. And I think as we've mentioned earlier, that there are plenty of things to celebrate about the way these new roads look, operate, and we'll definitely refer to those when we're working with the public to convert others to say, look, this is what we did on these roadways. And the fear of the unknown is something that we get a lot with the public, and so we plan to leverage those past project successes. We also look to pursue any opportunities that are out there, whether it be funding opportunities. As I mentioned, we have the 2 projects that are in our TIP, the Dale Street project and the Old Highway 8. The Dale Street project was awarded $2 million in federal funds. And so that helps when you can take, 60% of your project budget and leverage federal funds to move that forward. And so that Dale Street project is a pretty substantial project that involves a lot of different things, from traffic signals to a mill and overlay and other needed improvements. And so, this project aligned very well with the federal funding criteria that were in place. And so we put that up as we thought would be a project that would be very competitive. And indeed, the evaluation committee that awarded those federal funds thought the same. And so we were able to get the maximum award that was available for that solicitation. And then finally, we want to coordinate our efforts with the city, with the cities. And sometimes there are local initiatives that go on, and maybe there's utilities that need to be replaced and the roadway is going to be tore up. Again, that provides an opportunity for us to go in there and say, hey, let's not put back what was in place. Let's leverage this opportunity to improve the roadway environment. Also, we're looking to hopefully get to some economies of scale. As I mentioned earlier, not all these roads need to have a mill and overlay to make it happen. And so there's some minor things that we can do, like microsurfacing the road to give us a fresh surface, to restripe it. And then, with that type of work, if we can get 3 or 4 of these corridors and communities on board, that makes a nice little project where we can be competitive with the vendors who are looking to do that type of work, and we have enough, I'll say, work and mileage to attract their attention and get some good bids.
All right, before you move on, I got a question from Commissioner Mattis Castile.
Yeah, thank you, Chair McDonough. Thanks, Brad. I'm just like letting all these slides absorb, and so I might go back a few slides. I'm a little bit concerned about the way that they set the priorities with the racial equity component at the bottom. And I am particularly concerned about that because of the way roads are used. I represent, and along with Commissioner McDonough, the most racially diverse districts in the county, where we have a lot more people than are not in vehicles, but are on foot and on bike. And so when we think about the road improvements, and the impact on pedestrians, especially post-pandemic. I serve on the Land Use Advisory Committee for the Met Council, and we just had a presentation that we will never see traffic in the way that we did pre-pandemic, and that we have more people using bikes. That sales went up 110%, and that we need to build our roadways to accommodate that. There was a story in the Star Tribune this morning about safety improvements in Hennepin County because of bike infrastructure. And so I'm just thinking about, as we put this implementation implementation plan in place and our priorities, especially as a county, since we've said racial equity is a top consideration, not a bottom, why we wouldn't flip that, especially if we can take you did such a fantastic job on Larpenteur and McKnight that went very quickly and had overwhelming support for that activity, and we've seen such a huge benefit. Why we wouldn't take more tactical approaches, because to me, it really matches our all abilities plan. There is a way, as you said, micro surfing and restriping is far less expensive. When you talk about, as you were talking about Maryland from Rice to Able Street and the number of crashes, I personally have been in an accident in that section where I got sideswiped and the car reacted and then drove through the Sylvan Park. Luckily, there were no children playing, but if I think about like the population density, the people there, and when we're having those crashes, it's more than what's happening on the roadway. And so I'm just wrestling with that and how, I know we just had our conversation about the tip and it's going to come to our board soon, but I almost feel like we got to have a little wiggle room to accommodate what our priorities are as a county, as well as what this study has produced.
Sure, and I probably should have took the racial equity considerations and put it on a separate slide. In terms of the implementation plan that you see in the project report, it was developed on, I'll say those first 3 bullets. Knowing that our racial equity considerations are a very important thing at the county level. I wanted to point that out that, all of these projects we look to implement. And by looking through that racial equity lens, that will be a consideration as to when these projects move forward. Like all of our projects, we try to go through that racial equity lens in terms of making the transportation improvements with that in consideration. And so, we didn't want to green light any of these projects based on just, I'll say the objective factors that were brought forward as part of the plan. But instead, when we look to program our things, like all of our projects, we'll use that racial equity lens to help bring those things forward. So I wouldn't say it's at the bottom of our priority list in terms of implementation. It probably, the way it's presented here, I could see how you would interpret it that way. But really, the racial equity and when these projects will move forward, that's really more part of how we develop our TIP, and it wasn't an explicit factor that was used in developing this project report. So, in kind of conclusion, we have lots of opportunities to, and I've used this word before, eradicate these 4-lane undivided roads in our county. We look to leverage the opportunities that are out there to make the conversions in concert with community efforts. I have no doubt that these projects will improve the transportation environment for all of our roadway users. And finally, I'm really proud to share that this study received an award earlier this year from the Minnesota County Engineers Association as the 2021 Highway Safety Achievement Award recipient based on the project as we presented it. And I can tell you that I've had several inquiries from others that have got word of this study and wanted to know, any advice we had on how they could potentially implement this or do something similar in their city or county. So that's, we in Public Works appreciate the recognition for these efforts. And we really look forward to using this study as the basis to make some well-needed improvements going forward. And that concludes what I have for today.
All right, Brad, I've got Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Brad and team, for this great information and great work. So I have a couple of questions here, and I appreciate Commissioner Matas-Castillo's questions too on the equity, where that falls into the evaluation grid. So thank you for that. I'm curious about so when you're picking a project, if the community is favorable, you'll do it. If the community is not favorable, you won't do it. Or could you talk a little bit about how you're garnering like community support and city support? Because it's in a city, right? I mean, it's our road, but it's going to be in a city. So could you just talk about that that relationship and how that goes? I mean, I totally support the safety of these. I can see where it disrupts a community's traffic flow temporarily, and some people want it, some people don't. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Chairman, Commissioner, thanks for the question. You know, as we look to move forward to do this, you know, obviously, you know, some easy wins with places that are ready to go and we can convert easy, you know, we'll pursue those opportunities. You know, others we may need to be a little bit more deliberate. You know, we might anticipate a little longer time horizon to bring the community up to accepting or you know, endorsing this as an option. And so, you know, as part of that, you know, we were deliberate in what cities we involved early on to make sure that their staff had the technical details to help be ambassadors to move this forward when it comes time to implement those within their communities.
And I really appreciate that, because we all know cities don't like to be surprised, like we don't either. And so I'm really grateful that you did that. And I know you did it with some cities and not all. So I'm just supporting those efforts and bringing them along, because we do want their partnership, of course, in this, so they can be advocates with us on that. And then, Mr. Chair, if I have a couple other questions here. Streetlight data. So I'm sort of familiar with it. We use it actually with park stuff. You know, that people are wanting to use it with park, you know, data and things. It's a University of Minnesota phenomenon, right? And do they take it? I mean, it's phenomenon. It's a University of Minnesota effort, I believe. And do they do streetlight data everywhere? Or do you have to ask them to do a certain section? I don't know all the details of streetlight data.
Sure, Commissioner. Streetlight is a private firm that compiles all the information. It is I'll say starting to be referred to as kind of the premier opportunity to get data retrospectively. You know, it's easy to look back and using their system, their methodology. So it's offered nationwide. Obviously, they're you know, in dense population centers. The data is of higher quality. As you get to more rural parts, you know, the user base is less, and it's their modeling might degrade a little bit. So we're an ideal environment to leverage that resource to help, I'll say, make up for voids that we may have in data collection. And so, you know, they continue to offer and enhance their data, their products, their services, and I see it having a long-term potential to help fill some of our data needs when we wish, geez, if we could only went back and measured things 3 years ago, you know, before we did something to do a comparison for afterwards. So there are lots of great things that Streetlight has to offer.
Great. I somehow thought it was University of Minnesota related. So thank you for that clarification. And we obviously pay for that data then, right? We just say we want to pay for this segment of property and give us a bit of information. Okay. Thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, my last question.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Is I noticed in the Dale Street project that there's federal dollars. Was that a tab? Where did those federal dollars come from? Was that a tab request that was a few years ago? I'm trying to remember. So could you just clarify that for me?
Sure, Chairman, Commissioner, the federal funding that was awarded to the Dale Street project was through the Highway Safety Improvement Program.
Okay.
That was administered through Met Council. So that was awards that were made this last fall. And so we kind of jumped the gun with some of the data we had from the study to help, I'll say, really focus in on what we thought would be a very competitive project. So that was just recently awarded.
Great. Thank you. I thought it looked familiar. Okay, that is that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mary Jo. We have a question from Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McDonough. Thanks for answering my questions, Brad. My curiosity is, how much does a restriping project cost versus, you know, obviously if we have to tear up road or replace road, And is there any room for funds to do restriping? I'm especially thinking of, that section of Maryland. And by the way, thank you for Dale Street. I'm very happy about that. But I'm just thinking about what I've seen in my community, and even thinking about the data that streetlights get, is many people are not crossing at intersections. And they're not crossing at intersections because it's actually more dangerous, or they feel more dangerous because cars aren't stopping on those four lane stretches. Or if they are, they're going to swerve around to make a turn, like you had described earlier, and Commissioner McDonough shared how people die. And so they're actually crossing in the middle of the road because they can see the traffic easier. Now, we know for all the reasons we don't want people to do that, but I'm concerned that the data is not necessarily capturing how people are actually using the roads, especially pedestrians, and how we prioritize their safety. And if there's a way that with some restriping or some changes can at least slow the traffic and prevent those turning deaths in particular to pedestrians.
Yeah, and so I think that, there are scales of magnitude in terms of implementation. Obviously, reconstructing the roads, the highest cost, mill and overlay is a fraction of that, and then you get to a micro surfacing and a restriping where, that could be on the terms of tens of thousands of dollars a mile versus hundreds or millions of dollars per mile. And so, the key thing is making sure that we're providing a clear message to our roadway users. And so, is it possible to go out there and restripe a road? Sure. But, when you do that, you're going to have scarring from the old pavement marking. And, depending on the situation, it may not be clear to a driver, what the roadway configuration is. So, I would anticipate that we would like to pursue some sort of surface treatment that gives us a fresh surface to stripe versus maybe trying to force something in. Now, with that said, some of our soft conversions that we did on Maryland and Larpenteur, we did exactly that, but we had a permanent fix plan soon thereafter. And so, I think that there are a variety of ways that we can get at implementing these. And obviously the lower cost things give us more opportunities or more miles to touch with those limited funds that we're dealing with.
Just a follow up, and I know it's not often that a project comes in under budget, but maybe we can consider, if we find some cost savings on other projects, we could schedule in some of those lower cost changes, because I'm watching the results, and both from myself as a user, as someone who rides bikes across the city and county, as well as what I'm hearing from constituents. They are really happy with the results, even if they felt a little disdain before the change. The outcomes are really great, and we're actually seeing better commute times when there's less zigzagging through and other people being afraid of some drivers and aggressiveness. So I'm just hoping that we can move a few more of these projects ahead, because I really think it's fantastic, and you all have done such a great work that I'd like to see them roll right into implementation as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Commissioner, I share your optimism in terms of trying to move these things forward. And I know from a program delivery standpoint, we're going to look for opportunities to move these forward, as quickly as we can. And how we package these things and how we move forward are things that I know that we're going to talk about internally.
All right. I don't see any more hands raised for questions. So as we're getting ready to wrap up here, I just want to share some observations, kind of tying together some of the questions and comments that came, but then also, I'm really pleased that we undertook this study, and, getting the award really demonstrates the leadership of Ramsey County and willingness to do this. Here's where and concern might even be too strong a word. I just want to make sure it's always on, it's always present, right? So we started this actually with a crisis driven, with a death on Greenbrier, Maryland. That's what really started this. And then, it worked, and to community input, and certainly we had a great partner. St. Paul was fully on board, But I can tell you that first community meeting we had 100 people at the Eastside Freedom Library, and there was like 2 people that were saying yes and 98 people that were screaming absolutely no. And I'm looking in that room, and there's not one person left at Public Works that was actually experienced that, right? And when we ended that, after the testing, after we were going back to the community and saying we're going to do this, the only people in the room was me and Joanne and Jim Tolis and a couple of Public Works staff, because it works so well. And in fact, the Star Trib actually was able to find one of the more vocal no's at the first meeting, who was an absolute yes after we were able to demonstrate how well this worked in the community. We went to Larpenter, again, a death. We went to McKnight, again, a death. And I want to get us away from following the deaths and making sure that we're preventing the deaths. And the study does a really good job of teasing out where we can do this, and your list is amazing. Ted, I can remember when you came on, and you kind of came on in this transition, and I said to you, well, how about White Bear, Maryland to 94? And I was like, oh my God, no, that's a whole different beast, right? But it's showing up here, right? And it's showing up quite high. And to Trista's comments about the equity piece, and I go back to, if we always remember to look at this from peds, bikes, and can't forget transit users, right? We can't forget them, and then automobiles. But if we, with this data, it could be really easy for us to move to the easy ones, where the roadway is wide enough, because we got lots of roadways that are wide enough, where there's not a lot of access points or issues to solve. We could move to those really quickly. Those are not going to be the ones that prevent the deaths. The hard ones are going to be the ones that actually prevent the deaths, because the reason the deaths happen is because they're already hard, right? That's where the interchanges between humans and vehicles is already hard. So I just say that as we're looking at our list, I really do appreciate, I look at this, Maryland, White Bear, you got the, and this isn't about city, suburban by any means, folks. This is about, you've got a lot of tough ones at the top of that list. And my hope here, as we start checking those off, that we see that the tough ones are getting checked off too, not just the easy ones, right? Because we will have to go back to those tough ones someday, because someone will die. And then we will go back and we'll take a look at it. And we'll be chasing the deaths rather than getting ahead of them. So, but I appreciate you guys are absolutely leaders. I sat on the Center for Transportation Studies at the U, kind of during all this, and I was able to share this work as we were starting the study back then, and I know that they were interested in this work and the study that Ramsey County was leading. In the end, it's our community that benefits from this. I never drove Maryland, probably very rarely. I shouldn't say never, but I lived on the east side. I was born here. Maryland is like my street. I didn't drive it for 20 years because it was just an unsafe road to drive. And with that 4-3 conversion, not only is it safer for pedestrians, it's just safer for everybody, and it's actually more pleasant to drive. So Ted, I'll give you the last word, or Brad, or either one of you here, as we wrap up here for the day.
Hey, Ted, could I share 2 thoughts, and then I'll go back to you if that's okay?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I had a chance to dig through the study and talk with Ted a little bit, like a couple of weeks ago before we got to today, so we could just let everybody else talk. And my one question for Ted that just kind of ties into some of today was around the idea of this still feels like a generally auto-oriented way to evaluate safer roads. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I just was like, that was kind of my question. And what was helpful for me was Ted took some time to explain how, yeah, but we need this tool from that perspective as a part of then overlaying with the other policy tools and directions that the county has that then lead to the implementation documents. And I went, oh, okay, that really helps me understand like where this sits, that it's not an end all be all of its own. It still is an extremely important part of the work that until now didn't exist at all. And so I really appreciate Brad's explanation and work on it today, and Ted and everybody else who's been a part of it. I think the key will be, as we do bring forward some of these implementation pieces, is the moment to really show how these tools provide us with a better framework for where we want to go, alongside the all abilities, transportation network, racial equity policies, community engagement, and where we can really be. And what it really shows is there's a lot that's possible in ways that we didn't fully see before. So Ted, I hope I characterized your words okay from when you got to share some of that with me, but I appreciate you sharing that before and wanted to highlight some of that because I do think it helps from the policymaker perspective to hear how an engineer sees that as a tool to where you're trying to go.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Ryan.
Chair McDonough, I appreciate the time that you've given us today. Like I said, this is a technical report, and a lot of times you don't see these don't come to you, but again, we felt that it was important because it ties into our values and what we want to do and where we want to go with our transportation system. This doesn't happen without your support. We can't go into a community meeting and propose something like this if we don't have the support of the commissioner in the district or the board as a whole. And so just that goes back to your leadership in giving us a little bit of a push and a little bit of a nudge when you should in the right direction, and then supporting us through that effort. So we really appreciate that.
Excellent. All right. I don't see any further comments. Brad, I want to again, welcome to the county. 9 months into this, but welcome and nice job presenting today, and look forward to continuing this work here. And I know you've got 7 commissioners that are all looking forward to seeing some more of these 4-3 conversions, ever how we can put them in, whether it's a striping, a repaving, or actually a whole road rework. Our hope is we'll start seeing more and more of these. So, all right, with that, we're adjourned. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Jim,
Thank you.
thanks for the great stories too. They were
Yeah,
helpful.
really. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Context.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Welcome, Brad.
Really, really good work. Thank you.